No one can choose who they are in this world. This is among the first things Deltarune says on the first playthrough. Right after an entire sequence where the player molds their own vessel to control, all their hard work and effort is pushed away, discarded, as they're forced to inhabit a different body, one they did not want. This scene has stuck out to me ever since I played Chapter 1 for the first time nearly half a decade ago. Oh my god. This entire opening sequence has, for a matter of fact, especially now that more than half of the full game has been released. Apart from game overs, this typeface has only reappeared once at the end of Chapter 4, and the vessel we created has yet to even be mentioned. The only remnant of this scene is the name we inputted as our own, which is used for our save file and Castletown. This is the first scene that plays upon launching the game, and then it's left aside like it never happened. Why is that? Well, the thesis of this video is the overarching themes of self, choice, and identity within the subtext of Deltarune. Ralsei's self-worth, Noelle's self-esteem, Susie's role in the prophecy, and Kris, an unwilling puppet through whom we experience the entirety of the game. And it is by viewing the story through this lens that I believe to have made a pretty decent outline as to what could be awaiting us in the future of Deltarune, the narrative importance of the night, the weird route, and the development Kris and the rest of the characters will potentially go through. Keep in mind, however, this is not much of a traditional Deltarune theory video. I know it's titled as such, but that was mostly because Deltarune and theory go hand in hand in YouTube's algorithm, and also because it sounded cool. While I will be using my analysis to predict a few plot points and character dynamics, for the most part, this is a reading of the narrative. This is by no means a thorough investigation, as I doubt my current writing skills will be enough to give this idea justice, thus you're free to point out any inconsistencies or provide further evidence in the comments, just be civil about it. With all that said, let's dive into the depths. The lack of choice is one of the few things for the initial scene that is prevalent throughout the story. Our choices don't matter. Try to attack or spare the enemies, the game ends the same way, no matter if you talk to everyone or just run straight to the end. Even in the game's store page description, the question is raised. And only one ending? The ellipses definitely don't lower any suspicions. By the release of Chapter 4, we can see what this idea is being molded into, the prophecy and the inevitability of fate. No one can choose who they are in this world, what their role in the story is. Your fate has already been decided. Your name, your gender, your self. It has all been declared from the very beginning. Let's discuss the opening sequence again, also known as the Gunner Maker within the fandom. The idea of choice and identity is front and center here. The player is allowed to create a perfect vessel for themselves. They give it a form, a gift, likes, attributes, and even a name. Something interesting is what happens if the name we give to our vessel is the same as the name we give for ourselves, which is the very next question, by the way. The mysterious voice makes note of it.
Of course, they are the same.
If you're not already picking up what I'm putting down, I'll just be blunt. We are creating a self-insert here. In fact, to me it seems that a big part of Deltarune is dissecting what it means to be a blank slate character and how players interact with fiction. Again, another theme that branches off of the idea of identity. Of course we would see ourselves in the vessel that we create, but then, right before we're able to control our wonderful creation, the voice gets interrupted and it all gets discarded. We had the perfect form we desired, and yet we're forced into a body we did not wish for. Now I really wanted to call this a trans allegory, but I just can't quite prove it just yet. No one can choose who they are in this world. And with that notion, we're thrust into Kris. In storytelling, a character is assigned they/them pronouns for primarily two reasons. One, that's just the character's pronouns, and two, fluidity and mystery. If a character is described as a he or she, the reader can already make assumptions about them. Everyone has a general profile on what a typical man or woman looks like, at least to some extent. In that case, intentionally obscuring the character's gender or using atypical pronouns for them can cause an aura of uncertainty. They are not man nor woman. They're just a person. The initial information the reader gets about the character is fairly minimal and not enough for them to get an idea as to what they can expect. This is why the knight is commonly referred to as they or it. To put it bluntly, I believe Kris being non-binary was a deliberate choice by Toby Fox for Deltarune's narrative, and not just for representation. Obviously, it's great when representation in media isn't intrusive, like with food, it's used as a spice. The characters didn't have to be gay or people of color, but including said traits is a nice way to make your story feel more inclusive. To me, however, representation is elevated when a story wouldn't work as well without it. If, let's say, the main protagonist not being straight was an integral part of the narrative, and changing that in any way would cause problems, however mild or severe. Kris is not happy with themselves, or at the very least with their current state. Upon interacting with the mirror in Chapter 2, you get the flavor text, "It's what they call you." Granted, this could be used as a way to indicate the diversion between Kris as a person and Kris as the character we control. For Kris, is a deconstruction of what it means to be a self-insert protagonist. I mean, we're literally inserted into themselves, it does get more obvious than that, but the key part about their character is that Kris isn't us. They are their own person, with their own backstory, family, friends, beliefs, promises. And we see how much the situation they're in hurts them. They initially cannot play the piano even though they used to, they talk and act differently, something that Noelle comments on multiple times. And we can see all throughout the game how much Kris resents the player. It's hard to pinpoint their exact emotions towards them, at least in the normal route, but it's an uneasy alliance at best. For without their soul, they cannot solve the fountain, aka they cannot enact the role in the story. It's a conflict of interest, and whoever it is on the other side of the phone, it's 100% Carol by the way, makes sure Kris plays their part. Now, all this is to say that Kris being non-binary is integral to their character making sense. There's two ways to look into it, and I believe both to be valid for different reasons. 1. The lack of gender only exacerbates the fact that they're meant to mock the idea of a self-insert. It's just easier to immerse yourself into a character the less you know about them. This is the primary reason people still argue whether or not Frisk from Undertale is meant to be a self-insert protagonist. In this case, Kris not having an assigned gender only serves to increase the overarching conflict, as it's easier for the player to initially project onto them. 2. Non-binary if that's even a word, is technically a choice, and I don't mean that in a conservative sense. Whether you like it or not, gender and/or sexual identity is a part of yourself. You cannot decide what makes you feel comfortable or what feelings certain things will evoke. However, one must choose to accept that part of themselves. Getting out of the closet is the conscious decision I'm referring to. What I'm getting at is that this is just another way for Kris' sense of self to be stripped away from them. It's obviously way harder for non-gender conformative people to form their own identity, and judging by the fact that every single NPC in the game refers to Kris by they and them pronouns, it means that they went far enough with their self-discovery for the rest of the townsfolk to address them by the preferred pronouns. So despite how far they seemingly went with their journey to finally understand themselves and form a sense of identity, it was all for naught, just because they happen to be the protagonist of this story. Or it could just be that humans in the Undertale and Deltarune world are genderless. Who knows? But even if this particular rating, at least from a queer perspective, isn't foundationally solid, the fact that Kris struggles with who they are is still apparent, regardless of their gender. They're the only human in a monster town, and it's fair to assume that they never quite settled with that fact. When they were little, they asked when their horns would grow, and Toriel, instead of telling Kris the truth about their circumstance, instead gave them a red headband so they could pretend. Whether this was a good parenting decision or not is up for debate. When Kris finds books about how to care for a human, a book Toriel used to borrow for a while by the way, they shut it completely, noting the photos of unfamiliar humans inside. It's not a stretch to assume they repent their human nature to some extent. In fact, they actually show signs of acting like a dog in a few instances. Seriously, it's played as a joke most of the time, but the fact that this is even a thing in the first place is worth raising some eyebrows over. Kris is not only non-binary, but also good fairy representation. So not only do they not look like any of their peers, not only have they potentially never fully dealt with the idea that they are not a monster, but the only choice they had to make for themselves, the only semblance of self they had left, is stripped away from them. Kris can't even be themselves anymore, as we are the ones controlling most of their actions, and they are not happy about it. One last thing before wrapping up this section. In chapter 4, right after Kris gets rid of us, we can find them in the kitchen listening to someone on the phone while they make chocolate milk, their favorite drink. Once the call is done, they walk away and soon enough, they play the piano. And unlike the pathetic plunks from before, they play really well. It's only when ripping their own soul out that they can act on their own accord. It's weirdly ironic then. The one thing that's imperative to them staying alive, their soul, the culmination of their entire being, their physical embodiment of their sense of identity, is also the one thing that prevents them from being themselves. Ralsei is the most obvious example of conflicting interest when it comes to his identity. He's a Darkner for one, a simple real-life object brought to life from the Dark Worlds. Or what I personally believe, some loose idea or concept, like an imaginary friend or original character to Kris, as Ralsei doesn't follow many of the rules the rest of the Darkners do. But that's neither here nor there. Take the chapter 3 intro cutscene for example. Susie exclaims that normal objects don't have feelings, and Ralsei agrees that they shouldn't, that their only purpose is to serve the Lightners, and in his case, to help them fulfill their prophecy. Ralsei has been alone for most of his life. In a way, his entire existence revolved around the prophecy and serving the Delta warriors. He's bad at socializing, communicating his knowledge thoroughly, and is generally a bit of a pushover initially. For all he knows, making the Lightners happy is his only purpose. Anything else he may do to indulge himself, he deems unnecessary. In the cutscene where Kris and Susie enter his room, this is spelled out for the player. If I think about it, there's no reason for me to have anything. In Chapter 3, when Tenna is having his mental breakdown, Ralsei tries to, rather condescendingly, comfort him by saying that Darkness shouldn't worry about themselves and instead find solace in the fact that they were able to make the Lightners happy. That's the thing about Ralsei's character, he puts others way above himself. He's very selfless in both senses of the word. He doesn't really have a character initially, he's very one-note about pacifism and following the prophecy. Yet, as he spends more time with people he cares about, he starts to form a sense of identity for himself, and that scares him. In that same Chapter 4 cutscene, Ralsei doubts if a Darkner should even feel that way. But if you really think about this for a second, his behavior doesn't make much sense on its own. His hyperfixation on making the Lightners happy can't be derived solely from his role as a prince from the dark. Well, there is another piece to the puzzle.
When all hope is lost for the tale, the final tragedy unveils. To save the world, there is only one way.
The rest is punched away by Susie, who brushes it off in a way that reads to me as toxic positivity or denial. Whatever this final tragedy may be, I think it's safe to assume that it's something really bad. After all, Ralsei has spent the better part of Chapter 4 trying to find it so that Kris and Susie would not see it. And judging by his complete breakdown after this scene, I believe it's something that would nullify any character growth or relationships he forms. Why else would he view his existence as transactional, expendable even? He doesn't have a sense of identity because he doesn't think he deserves or needs to have one. And I think something interesting to consider as well is how similar he looks to Asriel. Now, Kris might be able to point on every single difference they have, but pretty much every other character remarks on their similarities. It's interesting then that the one character who has trouble finding his sense of self just so happens to look somewhat similar to a character we know already exists. And you bet your ass Asgore will see him in Chapter 5's Dark World and confuse him for Asriel as well, finally forcing the main narrative to unravel that part of his character. Nevertheless, his character growth is the easiest to discern through this lens because, frankly, it has already begun. It's not until Chapter 2 and especially Chapter 4 when he begins forming his own identity, his own opinions, likes, dislikes, desires, fears. He has let go of his tunnel vision view of the world, learning sarcasm, accepting fighting as potentially necessary in certain situations, and has generally grown a sense of self, what being Ralsei-like even means. And it's all thanks to Susie. Susie is the only character who has shown to possess the ability to change fate. She takes choices away from the player and can even initiate battles on her own. For all intents and purposes, she is the main character of the story. She is the girl with hope crossed on her heart, the one whose ideals and goals are challenged by Gersh in Chapter 4, the one who gets to decide the player order during the Sandy board. Why is that? We could just chalk it up to her being the rebellious teenager type, and also being the only Lightner in the fan gang who can actually talk. It's the only way the story could be told smoothly, but to me that's not a very compelling answer, so let's dig a little deeper, why don't we? Initially, Susie put up her bully persona as a defense mechanism of some sort. She was always seen as a problem child, never able to make strong connections to people. It's highly likely she's a foster kid, which only exacerbates her case. Even in hometown, she's the new girl, and her bully persona has made people actively afraid of her. But that's what it is. A front. Her home life is almost definitely not great either. She's constantly hungry, eating chalk and drinking the milk Alphys puts out in the back alley, and she makes jokes about stabbing herself one too many times. In Chapter 2, when she gets the chance to call home and tell her parents she's staying over at Kris's, she just doesn't. We also eventually learn that she envies Kris for having a good mother, and she would have hated Kris for being good at the piano had she not gone through their adventures. All this is to say that before the events leading up to the latter half of Chapter 1, Susie isn't happy. It's not until she's shown unconditional love from Kris, Ralsei, and especially Lancer that her mask begins to dwindle. And by the end of Chapter 1, and especially from Chapter 2 onwards, it shatters completely and Susie can be herself. She's the sole character who is truly free, the only one who will most likely be able to confront fate itself. Noelle doesn't believe in herself, Ralsei doesn't believe she can even be a self, and Kris has her own cluster of problems they're dealing with. Despite how dire everything around her is, she still manages to form a smile. Her friendship with Kris is ever growing, her determination to keep the memory of Ralsei and the rest of the Darkners alive is strong, and her bond with Noelle grows steadily. I mean, they're literally going on a date in the festival during Chapter 5. To put it bluntly, she's out and proud. She has friends who are there for her and support her at every turn. She doesn't have to mask her true identity anymore. I mean, She only started truly being herself after literally coming out of the closet. I sincerely believe Susie to be the most important character in the story of Deltarune, and she will be the one to bring hope to every other character. She already does so with Noelle and especially Ralsei. As mentioned previously, she's the sole reason his character arc has been ongoing, and Noelle has slowly been getting braver thanks to her. Granted, she still has a long way to go. And of course, Kris feels safer around Susie. It is explained as such in chapter 4 when inspecting the mirror in Kris's house and also when sealing the third fountain. In just a few days, they've become best friends, and I have no doubt in my mind that once Susie realizes what's truly going on with Kris, she'll do anything to help them through it. Honestly, her learning about the soul and by extent the player will probably be the biggest thing that will challenge their friendship down the line. And also that Kris works with the Knight, I suppose that would be a problem as well. I can imagine her initial shock when learning the truth, especially since she herself has said how much she hates when people do things behind her back. Or perhaps Kris unwillingly betrays her in favor of the Knight in chapter 5 and causes the roaring. Who knows? Regardless, I truly believe she will be the one to save the narrative. All she has to do is to keep believing in herself. One of Deltarune's biggest themes is escapism and how we choose to interact with it, and that makes sense through the lens of this reading. People usually shape their personality, beliefs, interests, and preferences by the media they consume. They can discover things about themselves and indulge in their beliefs. Noelle talks about how she wants to grow out angel wings and fly over the city, and Susie gets your wish of being Susie Zilla in chapter 3. It's a good, somewhat safe environment that allows one to figure things out about themselves. However, like with anything in life, there is the danger to indulging too much in fiction, and if one falls into escapism for too long, they may lose their sense of self and become completely detached from reality. We've seen the positive end of the spectrum with Susie, who managed to create lifelong relationships thanks to the Dark Worlds, so it only makes sense to wonder, what about the other end? What happens when you get darker than dark?
It's like to live with a hole in my hand.
Whoever the Knight is, they will. Hold on, let me change the song, this is a bit too loud. Okay, that's good. Whoever the Knight is, they very well lost themselves in the darkness. I mean, they're literally composed of the dark liquid or whatever the titans and their spawns are made out of. The Knight embodies the complete other end of the spectrum of delving too deep into escapism and losing yourself in it. Oh, it's just as easy to discover and build more about yourself as it is to completely leave behind what made you, well, you. It's a natural struggle of self-discovery and indulgence, longing to be something you're not and losing yourself in the illusion that you can be someone else. After all, it would just make sense for the protagonist and the antagonist of the story, Kris and the Knight, to have similar themes tying them together, both losing who they used to be just in different ways. Nevertheless, the Knight has lost themselves, literally and figuratively. They're the warped remnants of the person they used to be. They're someone who lost their sense of self, their sense of individuality. They're no longer a person, they're a concept, an idea. However, they do show more personality compared to the mindless killing machines that are the titans and their spawns. They laugh, taunt, and seem to have some semblance of strategy. So maybe, just maybe, the person they used to be still exists in there somewhere. Deep within the darkness could still be that same little girl who got lost in the forest all those years back. Her memory and sense of self twisted beyond belief. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to pull through. We'll be able to find her. Yes, I do believe this would be the Knight, specifically a twisted version of her consumed by darkness. There's already enough Death Knight videos on this platform, so go watch those later if you want actual proof. I'm playing the long game here, aka, I know I'm right, you'll just have to wait and see when the full game is out. Not only does this reading make sense of the Knight's actions and their potential role in the story going forward, it also elevates the thematic throughline in the narrative, and does something that's imperative for any story to work, a connection, however slim, between the protagonist and the antagonist. After all, it's implied that Kris was somewhat close to death, or at the very least the Holiday family. Why else would the game focus so much on Noelle as a character to the point that she's the only playable party member so far, apart from the main trio? Okay, a bit of a side tangent, but going into chapter 3 and 4, most people in the fanbase, myself included, assume that there will be guest party members joining us just like Noelle did in chapter 2. Toriel and Caddy or Jockington for chapters 3 and 4 respectively. But they did not, and now with more than half of the game available to us, the only characters apart from our main trio to get a lot of attention were the Knight and Noelle. Obviously, more characters appeared, and more characters are implied to appear in the spotlight later on, but they all connect back to either the Holiday family or the instant revolving deaths in some way. Almost as if this is building up to the big reveal in the future chapters that the Knight is Death. Papyrus Knight is really f***ing funny though. Her being the knight in some way makes sense narratively, has a lot of thematic impact, and it manages to connect everything this analysis has brought to light in a nice little bow. But it feels like we're still missing something. I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it, but something about this feels a little weird. Oh! Noelle is interesting because of how uninteresting she seemingly is. Yes, she has her information self-esteem problems, but that's kind of it. Apart from her connections to the other characters and her potential to become important in the future narrative, there's very little to entertain about her in terms of the overarching themes of identity. She's very much been a straight man in all of this, ironically enough. However, everything changes when we take the weird route into consideration. Now, to give you all a peek behind the curtain, this video was originally meant to be a more clear-cut, queer reading of Deltarune, if all the non-binary and identity talk wasn't obvious already. Thus, it was very interesting when I realized the weird, potentially romantic connotations of the weird route were something else. Noelle would ride the Ferris wheel with me, the thorn ring, and the entire ending of chapter 4 implying Noelle would go to the festival with us. And I'll be honest, I didn't know what to make of this initially, mostly because it just made me uncomfortable to think about, especially after the whole thing of the flower animation having to be changed. For those who don't know, during the weird route cutscene that plays in Noelle's room, Kris forces the thorn ring back into Noelle's finger, and it all cuts to an animation of a flower losing its petals. Some people read this as symbolic imagery of Kris deflowering Noelle, a term that refers to somebody being deprived of their virginity, which would be extremely problematic seeing as these are teenagers we're talking about. It's just a bit too dark of a place for the story to go, and yeah, the animation got changed twice to avoid the confusion. But just the idea of us forcing two child characters to romance each other like they're fucking Barbie dolls just seems a bit too much of a thematic leap. Creepy connotations aside, what does this have to do with our whole identity spiel? And that's when it hit me. What if instead of love, we were giving Noelle love? As in Undertale's definition of love. Okay, this bit was stupid. Now, this is a theory that has been circling around the community for a while, but I do subscribe most to the idea that the end goal of the weird route is us taking control of Noelle. We're making her stronger, giving her equipment and powers that she's never had before, and she literally says at the end of chapter 4's weird route that she's looking forward to hanging out with us. I cannot stress this enough. We're taking advantage of how submissive she is to her peers and family. I could have worded that better, holy moly, and we turn her into our willing pawn. Keep in mind, this is exactly what Queen was trying to do in chapter 2, turn Noelle into one of her pawns so she could achieve world domination, and it's throughout this chapter that Noelle learns to stand up to Queen. How curious is it then that in the weird route, this character development goes completely unfledged? If you allow me to indulge a little, there must be a reason for the player to attempt the weird route. In Undertale, a player with no actual knowledge wouldn't be compelled to start a merciless run just because. It's a personal choice. At the beginning of the game, Flao exclaims how this world is kill or be killed, and the game is all about how we don't have to kill anyone. So naturally, the question arises, what if we did kill everyone? I personally think something similar is happening in the weird route. The game is all about how our choices don't matter, how we can't choose the person we wish to inhabit in this world, and how our fate has already been decided. So naturally, what if we tried to break that idea? What if we weaved between the lines of code that hold this world together and found some way to potentially break free from our restrictions? What if we are finally able to choose who we are in this world? And naturally, we achieve this by manipulating the timid and scared little girl that is Noelle Holiday. And like, this route exists for a reason, right? It wouldn't be included if it held no narrative weight, especially considering how often it's referenced even in the normal route, as long as the player is willing to look for secrets. Every super boss so far, including Ram, constantly references freedom, and the backseats minigames in chapter 3 are all about foreshadowing the weird route. It's almost as if these secrets are designed to be found by curious players who might end up being curious enough to try and follow the weird route. Now, why does the knight not have the freedom motif? Because they're ugly, stupid, and no one likes them. This theory could also alleviate one of the most controversial points of consensus within the community, the angel's identity. Noelle or the player? There's arguments for both, and I won't be diving too deep into the discussion because that's an entire rabbit hole in and of itself, but I propose this. Why not both? What if the player is the angel, and by us taking control of Noelle in the weird route, that makes her an extension of us, aka also the angel? Yes, it's flimsy and it bears no relevance to the theory at hand, but I figured I'd throw my hand into the ring with that one. Just some food for thought. Deltarune is a story about choice and how fiction can help someone mend their sense of self and identity, for better or for worse. Just like how the dark worlds are a warped representation of the light world through the lens of shadow, so is fiction a creation molded by one's interpretation of reality, by their experiences and beliefs. The two influence each other, a constant back and forth, a fine balance to be maintained. The light is guiding, concrete, but it can also be blinding, rendering oneself lost and confused. Absolution leaves no room for change after all. Thus, one may find themselves seeking refuge in the dark, a place as foreboding as discomforting, an infinite labyrinth of possibilities where one may lose themselves should they venture deep enough. One world cannot exist without the other, for a white pen's strokes will be lost in a white canvas. And lastly, choice. We are born into a world we did not choose, a family, a country, a body we had no control over. In a way, Deltarune's initial statement rings true. In the grand scheme of things, our choices don't matter, our lives will come to pass and the world will keep existing without us. No matter what path we choose, what ending we strive for, the game will reach its conclusion. Our choices don't matter, for there really is only one ending, the turn of the last page. However, there is something more important than reaching the end, something more tangible, short-term. So, what will it be? In the face of absolute certainty, the inevitability of fate, what will you do? Will you choose inaction, accepting things as black and white, and following what has been prophesied to a T? Will you choose malice and manipulation, taking advantage of your friends and peers to finally achieve what has been wrongfully taken from you? Or will you choose to confide in them, to fight alongside them, and make your soul glow along with the hope in their heart? That decision is yours to make, and it's a decision that must be done sooner than later. But no pressure. After all, our choices don't matter, right? Whatever our choice might be, the pen of hope is waiting, right there on the floor, for us to pick up and write. And while our book might be lost among the millions of others in an inconceivably infinite library that is our world, it is still something we create. A piece of ourselves, a representation of our identity. So, write your own story. It's okay if it's not perfect, as long as it's something you can call your own. So, now the question arises, where does friend fit into all of this? For any newcomers, I released my first commercial game project a while back titled Connected Fates. If an RPG Maker style adventure puzzle game with cool meta elements sounds like something you'd enjoy, feel free to check it out. Links and such are in the description. To my returning viewers, thank you so much for the support on the Super 64 video, and I hope that you were able to get a kick out of this one just the same. Remember to stay hydrated and keep yourself safe. Thanks for watching.